Thank you for taking the time to check out the Insight Myanmar podcast. If you like what you hear, we'd be very grateful if you would consider rating, reviewing, and or sharing this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. Also, be sure to subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If our feed is not in your podcast player, please let us know and we'll assure it can be offered there.
Do not lose hope. Do not lose faith. Most importantly, do not lose the momentum.
To listen to an interview I conducted with Claire Thorp. She describes her journey into meditation through the 10-day Vipassana courses of SN Goenka and her subsequent visits to India and Burma. She also goes into why she started up Sati Designs, a company based in England, which, in her words, quote, creates thoughtfully designed ethical meditation cushions to enhance your living space and inspire you to invest time in your well-being, end quote. Sati Designs meditation cushions are ethically sourced and beautifully designed to serve yogis in all sitting postures. As Claire has also been following the democracy movement in Myanmar since the coup, she has generously offered to donate 20% of all sales at Sati Designs to our nonprofit mission, Better Burma, which supports urgent humanitarian missions across Myanmar. This special promotional period starts today, October 14th, and runs for 2 weeks through October 28th. Whether one makes a purchase as a gift or for oneself, a quality meditation cushion can support a lifetime of practice. And in this case, the cushion is the added benefit of serving as an expression of gratitude, knowing that a part of the proceeds went back to support those in the country where these priceless teachings of liberation are disseminated and preserved. To learn more about Claire's company, head to satidesign.com. And with that, let's get into my discussion with her. And I'm happy to be joined in this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast with Claire Thorp. She's the founder of Sati Design, which we're going to hear a lot more about. They have some very exciting products that I think are very relevant for many of our listeners and connected with what's going on in Myanmar now as well. So Claire, thanks so much for joining us here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's get right into understanding a bit about what your company does, how it was founded, and what it produces. When I looked on the website, I was quite interested to read all the descriptions behind not just the products you offer, but how they're made and why you went about founding this mission, which is basically meditation cushions, making a very special type of meditation cushion. So describe a bit about why you wanted to start this company, what led to that, and then learning a bit about how these products are made and put together.
Yeah, so Sati was born out of I basically started meditating about 8 years ago, and it changed my life completely. I sat a course at Dharmadeepa Vipassana Center, did a 10-day course there, and inspired by my partner at the time, actually, who was practicing, and I was very intrigued about this technique. And I would see him get up every morning at, sort of early in the morning, sit for an hour, and it just really sort of, that it sparked an interest in me. I was intrigued, like, what is he doing? I didn't really understand it. I was quite sort of I would ask him afterwards, like, what are you doing for that whole hour? How are you staying so still? And so that sort of really started me thinking about meditation and, and sort of the benefits I could see in him, working in his life. It really it interested me. So I went and took a course, and it blew me away. This first course of mine, it was extremely difficult, but I got through it, and I was just absolutely astounded by the results. It's funny because after that first course, I said to myself, oh my gosh, I'm never doing that again. It was so hard. But even though I said that, I sort of knew there was something in it. There was some sort of pull there, almost like a sort of magnetic pull that I felt towards the practice, just because it was so powerful. And sure enough, after about 6 months, I went back and I served, and I think after that service, I really started to realize just how I guess just how powerful this technique and the whole practice was. And over these 8 years, I have been sitting and serving on a fairly regular basis. And so a few years ago, I thought, right, I need to invest in a meditation cushion, so that I can practice at home and in between retreats. And I went online to find a cushion that I liked, and there were many cushions available, of course, but they sort of prized function over aesthetics. It seemed that was more, that was kind of the main selling point of these cushions. And I thought, actually, what I really wanted was a cushion that was that I felt was sort of had some sort of soulful element to it, or a that was aesthetically pleasing, a cushion that I would happily have in the corner of my bedroom and keep out, not have to pack away. So, and then this quote kept coming back to me, which was, create the things you wish existed. And I thought, well, maybe there is there's an opportunity here for me to fuse my passions, which, are meditation and textiles, and my sort of creative calling, because I did textiles at uni. And this sort of led me on a journey where I went to India for a few months, and I went to Jaipur, which is it's the sort of the home and the heart of handicrafts, so block printing and things like that. So I've always loved traveling, and I've always loved India. And what happened was, I ended up doing this incredible course in natural dyeing, so using plants to dye fabrics, and also block printing with natural substances like mud. So I did this course, and through this course, I just met some incredible people who just, taught me all these incredible skills, and it all just kind of came together. And I just thought, yeah, this is the time, and it really feels like Sati is this. It's all these values aligning for me, and Sati, for those of you who know anything about Pāļi, Sati means awareness, and it's so, the reason to call this company Sati is just because it came about because of this very, I wanted the process to be a very conscious one, where we were using, that the impact on the environment was very low, using natural dyes and processes, but also just this very, the nature of block printing. It's a very mindful technique, because it's very hands-on. You have a wooden block that's been intricately carved, and it's, so you're having to print very well. I mean, they do it very quickly, but when I was learning, I was having to do it very slowly, because it's very much about the pressure of the block on the fabric, getting it evenly sort of spaced and things like that. So I just think the whole process is very mindful, which I feel is absolutely in line with the actual function of the product, which is to cultivate mindfulness.
That's great to hear. And I think one of the things that I appreciated when I saw your website and saw the products, going back, I guess, a bit into just the practice of meditation. I remember when I first started out, and a group of peers around my age, I was living in Japan at the time, so some Japanese and foreigners that were there, and we were all kind of getting into the groove more seriously together. And when the courses would end, we would go somewhere in the Japanese countryside and hang out for a few days and do our sittings. And I remember at one point, someone after a sitting, one of the guys just kind of turning to me and saying, the one of the great things about meditation is we don't need anything to do it. We can just, this is something we could do anywhere. We don't need to buy anything. We don't need to be anything. We can just, it's just this thing we get to discover and practice inside ourselves. And that kind of minimalist attribute of the practice, really, that quote always hung in my mind. And when you think about the practice of meditation, you really don't need much. And the only two things I can really think that you need are some kind of cushion and some kind of blanket or shawl. I don't know what else you really need for that practice to just simply do it. And you don't even really need those things. I mean, all of us who have meditated have meditated in some probably rather strange places, just out of necessity, just with whatever was around makeshift. But those are the things that to really be comfortable you need. And as far as the shawl, I have one of my most prized objects is the shawl I was given. I before I had been to India, and I'd seen these older meditators in the West having these Indian shawls, and to me it always seemed like this mark of like you've made it, or you're some kind of seriousness or legitimacy, that you have this really nice, thin, beautiful shawl that you're wrapping around yourself in just this elegant, graceful way. And I happened to mention that to a friend of mine who later became a Vipassana teacher, and then later left that, became a monk, and he's a lifelong monk in between Thailand and Canada now. And I said this to him, and he gave me this shawl, and I immediately said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't saying that, to like remind you that I wanted a shawl and you had an extra one to give me. And, now I feel bad about it." And he said, no. He said, actually, and he gave it to me, and he said, "But, I give you this. And if you become enlightened, you have to remember I gave you this shawl and send me merits." And I kind of laughed, and he didn't return the laugh. And he said, "No, I'm serious. Like, I'm giving you this shawl because I know that you're a serious meditator, but if you attain any stage, you have to remember that this is the shawl that I gave you, and share the merits with me at that time. And I said, yes, okay, you got it. And that's, that was 2 decades ago, and that's still the shawl that I have around, and that whole memory and gratitude and, friendship with him. And then when I went to India, that was one of the things on my list, I want to find, where do I get these meditation shawls, and looked all around and ended up finding a few I liked and brought them back for those closest to me as, the special gifts, that this is just as I had received this from this person that meant so much to me. This was the intention I was giving it to others. So, so the shawl part of it, and I should mention, I'm really happy to say that I see that Pāļi is now selling Indian shawls. And so those that don't have to travel across the world or have a friend who does, you can actually, you can get those accoutrements are available now. Maybe it takes away some of the mystique, but it's great that those are accessible. But the other part is the cushion. And when I started to practice as well, same as you, it's like, well, where do I buy the cushion? And at that time, 20 years ago, there just weren't that many options. And most of them they did not look like they were designed by meditators. They looked like they were designed by people that were like, this is, meditation, yoga, cushion, whatever you want to do. And it didn't, for knowing how I sat, they weren't made with any comfort. So my mom actually just made them for me, just bought padding and basic textile, and just made something workable I could sit on that was that did the function, and been around since that time. But so all of this comes back to what you're doing. And when you look at these two basic things, you don't need to meditate. Well, to meditate, as we said, you don't need anything. But if you do need something, these are the only two things I can really think of that you need are a cushion and a shawl. You have that, you're good to go anywhere. And and you are,
that's absolutely right.
Right. And you're bringing the cushion part in. So this is kind of just this theoretical background I'm thinking of when I see this, and, that this is the value you're bringing, and that people that just as this shawl that I got is so meaningful to me and so imbued with just so much deep significance of how it was given and what it means and how it was made. I think for a meditation cushion, if it's properly made, this is something that as a serious practitioner you buy for life. And that if it is ethically sourced and made in a mindful way, and then of course, has to have the practical way of being made that's suitable for many, many hours of sitting. If it has all those features combined, then this is something that is just your friend that accompanies you with everywhere you go. So so these are just some of my thoughts I had when I started to see your process and think about my own background in meditation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those things. And I really do agree with you that it's a cushion it's a sacred object, isn't it? That, like you say, you will use, perhaps daily for the rest of your life, and so it's significant. And and I think that this was one of the things that that I felt like I wanted to inspire is that I wanted to create these beautiful cushions that would almost kind of call you, be a sort of an inspiration to you to sit more. Because if you've got a lovely setup in your bedroom, in your living space, whatever, for me personally, that is it's an invitation to sit more. And I know that it doesn't need to be a beautiful cushion for you to be able to meditate, because like you say, we can sit on any cushion, or even no cushion, sometimes it's fine, you can meditate anywhere. But I think for me personally, I'm quite an aesthetic person, and I've always been interested in sort of interiors and the way that your environment affects the way you feel and the way that energy flows through a house and all of these things. And so I think it's, helping people to create a sacred space that they can devote to that practice is, I think it's really important. And it's just a nice incentive, isn't it? On those days where perhaps we don't really feel like practicing, because those days do come where you sort of you feel a bit uninspired. But if you've got this lovely setup just waiting for you, it's a little, it's a little invitation there.
Yeah, and I think the whole intentionality of the sacred, piggyback on a word that you use that I definitely agree with, concerning how to make a meditation space that, whether it's a time of day or a place in the house or a, what one is using. Some people might even do something like aromatherapy or have some kind of chanting or just something that makes it sacred in the day, that this is away from other parts of life, and there's a place for it, and one can go there and it becomes more of a refuge than something that bleeds over with everything else. So that it definitely can serve that purpose. And I think before I saw your page, I just hadn't really seen a lot of other products that came with that intentionality. Often it looked like it was the other way around. It looked more like a marketing or an entrepreneurial opportunity where someone was just trying to tap into this existing crowd. Rather, it's someone from within that crowd thinking, as you said earlier in this interview, that if I can't remember the words you used, but to create something that you want to see that doesn't exist. And in that sense, if it's a product not being marketed for a group, but actually coming from within that group to fill an existing need, then it can create that significance. And then more importantly, once it comes into someone's life, that can then be, it can take on an even greater significance from, of course, how it's made and how it's produced, and the mindful qualities of those are one thing, but then as it's used for that daily practice, it takes on quite another set of meaning over the years. But I'm wondering also, if you talked a bit about the block printing that you do, can you describe a bit more of the process? And I should say that on your website, you go into a lot of detail about the different aspects of how this is, how you've come to make these and how it's sourced and what's inside it and everything else. And it's quite fascinating. But for those that aren't on the website now, can you walk us through some of the more interesting parts of production and also your decision-making process and actually going to Jaipur and how you chose which communities you wanted to work with, how you monitor the work they're doing, how their process of working goes into your methodology and your beliefs and what you wanted to create?
Yeah. So in terms of the actual process, the way it's wonderful how it's all unfolded, because I went to Jaipur with my friend Ben, and we just it all just evolved like so organically. We just ended up meeting people. So we had the intention to go and create these cushions, and Ben was interested in block carving, so carving the wooden blocks. So we went to the area in Jaipur. There's an area called Sanganer, and it's the block carving sort of area. It's literally, that is all anyone's doing there. And there's this particular street which is where all the workshops are. And so you walk down this street and it's just incredible, the sound of the tapping. They use these tiny little chisels and a wooden block to sort of hit the top of the chisel. And it's so fascinating. It's like all these workshops, and they don't have doors or anything on the workshops, so you can just see straight in, and there's about like 4 or 5 guys in this tiny little space, all obviously sitting on the floor, as they're very good at doing in India. And and just chipping away, all bent over, chipping away at these wooden blocks. And so we went down this street, and he actually, we were with an Indian friend of ours, and so she was able to translate for us, because he wanted to find someone who could teach him how to carve. So so our friend Nidhi was able to kind of to ask this one man whether he could teach Ben to carve, and he agreed. And so he started teaching Ben how to carve over the course of a few weeks, and I think it got a little bit difficult with the translation, because obviously Ben couldn't communicate, he couldn't speak Hindi. So after a while, there was a man called Kamveer who worked in a workshop sort of further down the road, who could speak English and would come and see Ben, and see how he was getting on, and they would chat. And anyway, Kamveer ended up taking Ben on in the end, just because it was an easier setup. But Kamveer showed Ben how to how to carve these blocks, and I think Ben was quite surprised at how difficult it was, because these, they have a set of chisels, and they're all ever so slightly different. So they have slightly different tips and slightly different ends, and you hit them in a slightly different way. So I think they were all very entertained by by this Westerner sort of giving it a go. They thought it was great, and they were very encouraging. And over time, he got really quite good, and he was able to do more intricate designs. And the way that it was working is I was drawing the designs on graph paper, and then I would give them to Ben, and then he would carve the wooden block. It's Indian rosewood that they use for the blocks. And then, like I say, I did this natural dye course, which was actually just outside Jaipur in a village called Bagru. So this is a village that's very well known for its natural dyeing, and there's a lot of families who have maintained the tradition, because it's a sadly it is a dyeing tradition, just because chemical dyeing is much more it's easier to sort of mass manufacture chemically dyed fabrics. So it's a very niche, it's a very niche process, but incredibly beautiful. And so after I'd finished this course, I had a word with the people who own this particular workshop. And it really is a workshop. It's not a factory at all. There's like 2 people who run it, and then there's a man called Shivraji, who is like a print master, and he comes from a whole line. His whole family, this is what they've done. They've always just done block printing and natural dyeing. So I had a word with them and just said, look, would you be open to helping me produce these meditation cushions? But really the covers, not the actual cushions. And they said they would be. So between Ben and Kamveer, who were carving the blocks, and then Avinash and Kriti and Shivraji, who were the dyeing and printing people, we were able to print these beautiful covers. And then we had to source someone who could create the insides of the cushions. And we've got a few different styles and sizes and shapes and things of cushion. But the Zabuton, the big square floor cushion, and we have some rectangular, smaller cushions that you would place on that floor cushion. We found a man called Makbul to make the sort of cotton inner for those cushions. And actually, I found him through. I sat a course at Dharmatali in Jaipur, and I inquired about where they got their cushions made, because when I was sitting the course, I was thinking, oh yeah, that's an obvious that's an obvious link to make, because they will have employed someone to make these cushions. So they very kindly pointed me in the direction of Mukbul. And again, he is, it's a family business. He works from his, just basically basement of his house, and all his family help. His mum's there, his daughters. He doesn't speak any English, so his daughters, one particular daughter would translate for us, which was always very helpful, especially when you're dealing with dimensions and things. You don't want to get it too wrong. So between all these sets of people, we were just able to create. We sort of linked them up, and just so production now, luckily, can actually happen, from afar, because everything's in place now. For it to happen. So if we need to reorder things, we can just ask the relevant people to make the things, and they're all connected. So so it's all just been I don't know. I think the intention was so strong for this particular venture, for this particular project. I just think everything, sometimes things just conspire to help you, and I really feel like that happened, especially because when we were in India, it was 2020 and COVID hit just as we were kind of in the middle of this project. And when I look back at the timing of all of this, it's quite astonishing, really, because we basically managed to finalize production just before lockdown actually sort of hit. So, which is I still can't quite believe how we managed to get it all, all the kind of like threads tied up, so to speak, and everything finalized, and everyone knew what they were doing. And then lockdown hit, and then Ben and I were in an apartment for a month or so, just, could sort of go out for a couple of hours a day, and that was it. So it was quite a crazy trip, that first one.
That's great. So you mentioned about the different patterns that are made and the style of making them. Is there any significance or background to the patterns that are chosen? Like, are there deeper meanings or significance of what the patterns refer to, or do they have ethnic or cultural background or connections, or what goes into the patterns that end up being created on them?
So I guess the prints that I've designed are, they don't necessarily have any, there wasn't a sort of conscious effort to, create symbolism or anything. I'm a big fan of mark making and quite minimalist design. So I think that was really my, they don't necessarily have any deeper meaning. Although we do have one print which is a sort of fleck, which is created using mud. And we've called that the Anicca print, because we wanted to use, we did want to call them significant things. And as anyone who has done a Vipassana course will know, Anicca is impermanence. And for some reason we looked at this print and it just looked like Anicca. It's a sort of strange thing to say, I know, but it was like, oh yeah, that one's definitely Anicca, that one. But it wasn't intentional. So yeah, I wish I could say it was deeper meaning, but no, it's more just the aesthetic is minimal and calming. I wanted to use just sort of simple shapes, and yeah.
Right. And how about the filling? What have you found to be able to stuff the cushions with?
So our floor cushions, and like I said, the rectangular cushions, and also we have some knee cushions to support your knees. They're all stuffed with cotton, and so they're all stuffed by this man Maqbul, and it's really fabulous. His workshop is wonderfully sort of chaotic, and how would I describe it? Basically, sort of, there's a simplicity, to the way he works. He's very. I think he's quite a sort of traditional man, and so when Ben and I went to go and see his little workshop, it's like it's just sort of like cushions everywhere, fabric everywhere. And then he's got this wonderful back room where he has this fantastic machine, which is, I suppose, the only way I could describe it is it looks like almost like a Victorian mangle. It really does look ancient. And he wanted to show us this machine, and we were like, oh, what does this machine do? And he went and he turned it on at the wall. And it basically, what it does is he when he buys the cotton in, it comes in sort of quite solid, in a solid form. So it's like a sort of cotton batting, like a cotton filling. And what he does is he sort of feeds it through this machine. And this machine, I don't really know how it works, but it fluffs the cotton up and then it sort of spits it out the other side in these kind of like, almost like cotton clouds. These sort of puffs of cotton come out the other side. And he has a curtain to stop all these cotton clouds kind of just taking over the entire room. And then he goes behind the curtain with these two wooden sticks, almost like big chopsticks, and he kind of collects up these cotton clouds to then stuff the cushions with. So we were just absolutely fascinated by this process. And what was funny is he couldn't understand what we found so amazing, because we were laughing. We were just like, wow, this is just incredible. And, but this is his everyday. Which was really funny because, he was like, well, this is just what I do. So, so we fill those ones with cotton. But then we also have the Zafu cushion, which is the round cushion. And those are filled with spelt husks. So spelt husks are basically a waste product. It's the husk of the spelt flour grain. And there really are very few uses for these husks. So, but they make a fantastic cushion filling because they're very light and malleable as well. So they're ideal for really, you can really kind of get a good seat going with those. You can really sort of mold yourself to them.
That's great. And that actually leads to my next question, looking at the design and sitting options that you chose. And I think for those who haven't meditated before, there's this kind of idealized imagination of a Buddha statue or kind of new age photos that just show a person sitting in sunlight or on the beach, just perfectly their back erect and their legs just evenly balanced and their hands open. And sometimes it's funny when you go on meditation courses where you see first time students, you'll see the first several hours, you'll see students sitting in that kind of perfect supposed understanding understanding of how one should sit. And then, of course, as one practices meditation further, as you're working through different things in the mind and body, you can end up in some pretty odd postures and pretty odd facial expressions and, and everything else. And so there's this reality of what it's actually like to sit, and people who do that every day know that. And then there's the imagination of the bliss and the perfect posture that we see as how it's advertised. Of course, being a meditator, the former, and how sitting actually takes place, and also the different body shapes, different limitations of bodies, different ways of sitting might lead to different things in the meditation. So people might experiment and try different kinds of postures to experiment with that process, and as well as obviously age and other things. And so I think just simply going to a meditation course, you see all the different ways that people are navigating, especially in the West. I think in Burma, it's quite different. I mean, people just sit on hard rock or wood or whatever else. I often laugh in Burma, a sign of how serious or austere someone is, a monk or a practitioner is at sitting, you simply look at their ankle bone. And for those who have really put in the hours, and mostly it's on hardwood, you see that ankle bone just completely worn away and calloused from resting on that wood. And all my time in Burma, I still couldn't do that. I foot would asleep, and just pain beyond what I was able to endure, and needed sometimes when there wasn't a cushion, what simply wasn't possible, I would do little tricks like putting like a sock, right on the ankle bone or right above or behind it, just so that it just gave that little bit of relief there. But I think certainly in the West, when you go to a course, you see all the different experimentations of how people sit and how they're looking for some kind of basic comfort to be able to engage in the process without being distracted. So as you were looking at having this understanding, and then as you were looking at the different types of options to make available, because again, this is something practical. This is not just a kind of pluff piece of wanting to look like it's fitting into the next big thing, but this is something that you actually want to be something of the sacred, something of a lifetime investment, something that people will not just look good or have as a conversation piece, but something that is actually supporting and promoting even their daily meditation, and something they come to love and imbue with meaning. But for that, they're, in addition to beautiful prints, it needs to be practical, and it needs to be practical for lots of different bodies, lots of different postures, lots of different ways of people going with the practice. So how did you as a meditator and then as a designer and entrepreneur think about the different styles of cushions to offer so that the many varied kinds of sitting methodologies can be accommodated through that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually, because this is one of the reasons that I wanted to make the rectangular cushions in particular, because that was something that for me, I sat in quite a few different centres, and most centres have those cushions, the Vipassana centres. You might get a few Zafu type round cushions, but on the whole, the standard is those rectangular cushions. So I have practiced mainly on that style of cushion, rather than sort of a high, because the Zafus tend to be a little bit higher. So this was something that I wanted to create. Because I just couldn't find, although they seem to be ubiquitous in the centres, I couldn't seem to find them online. And I do prefer a lower seat. So that's why I've designed those ones in particular. But what's interesting is that actually the majority of people want the Zafu, the round cushion. And I don't know if that's because it's just that particular shape is more common. So people are more familiar with the shape, especially people who may not have done much meditation before. That's when they think of a meditation cushion, that's what they think of. And also another thing that was very difficult to find was knee cushions. And that is a very practical cushion. So, I think unless you've done hours of meditation, you may not see the need for knee cushions. But, when you're sitting a course, it doesn't take long for you to realize that, that actually, like you said, with the sock on the ankle, it's like, oh gosh, you need to prop up limbs in weird places. And it's funny what you said about, newer students sort of trying things out, because it's quite common, isn't it, to see these sort of Dharma thrones sort of forming on Vipassana courses, where students kind of and I think I did the same. That first course, it was like, oh well, if I have another cushion here, then it will be easier. Oh, but maybe I need another cushion here, and then you end up with a mountain of cushions, and you realize that actually it helps a little bit, but it doesn't really make that much difference how many cushions you have. It's still going to be a bit painful.
Yeah, I think when I first went to Burma, I was just so impressed by the austere conditions that everyone, for the most part, is able to just bear through. And part of that, of course, is the culture. I mean, even like Japan or other Asian countries, or as you mentioned with India, they live closer to the ground. I remember from my time in Burma going back and telling my grandfather, who was in his 80s at the time, that the elderly people I saw in Japan were all sleeping on the floor with futons that they made every night. And I remember him just looking at me in absolute awe that, and yet he said, if I were to try to sleep on the floor, I would never be able to stand up again. It's a different way of living. But that being said, I was really moved by by how easy it seemed to be for Burmese of all parts of life to come into a meditation course or a sitting and just be able to just sit and just bear and just manage. And it had an impression on me. And then especially as I started to live in the society longer and I saw Westerners come, and you'd see a sitting at a pagoda or a cave or somewhere, and I would sometimes laugh about the ritual, it seemed to me, of the Westerners spending 10 minutes preparing their sitting site, blowing up cushions and taking out shawls and setting a place to sit, and the Burmese would just go and sit. And I was so influenced by the culture at that time, and really trying to understand through their perspective and integrate into that I was probably a little judgmental and a bit like, oh, this is this kind of these Western comforts and needs and everything else. But I think as I've aged and matured and looked at it from a bit more perspective, I just see that like dedicating your life, or at least even part of your life, whatever part that is, to a practice of letting go and observing, this is so against the stream and so hard and so challenging that I'm just much easier than, being a bit more hardcore and rigid in my beliefs when I was younger, and just like whatever it takes to do that, and whatever, if you need a little more of this or a little less of that, but by getting that is able to more easily dedicate your life in some way to undergoing that practice, that's a good thing. And of course, it's wonderful to see the more practitioners who are coming with more of this dedication and perhaps even more sacrifice and more renunciation, one can say, renunciation of all types of things. That is, of course, very inspiring, but it's also, it's a hard path, and, life is hard. It's full of a lot of dukkha and challenges and unpredictabilities. And I think as you mature and gain a deeper appreciation of that, you realize that having a little bit of this and that to just ease into that spiritual renunciation, that's really okay for people doing what they need to be able to make that space and make that time, which, really so few are doing, and is so against the values of most worldly societies anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there is that, I think when you sort of start to walk a spiritual path, there's almost a bit of a danger, isn't there, that you can kind of go too extreme on the kind of like anti-materialism route where you're sort of, I guess you're denying yourself things that you don't need to deny yourself, because you can still be spiritual and live in abundance. It's not a prerequisite. Of course, there are advantages of renouncing certain things, but like you say, life is hard, and sometimes we need certain comforts, and that's okay. And and having a something like a beautiful meditation cushion, of course it's not going to be the top priority for a monk or a nun, that it's a beautiful object, but perhaps for lay people that is more of a need. So I want to bring the conversation a bit more to Myanmar. I understand that you took a pilgrimage there as a meditator. Can you share a bit about when that was and where you went and the impressions of that visit? So that was early 2016, I think it was, and so Myanmar as a country hadn't really been on my radar until I started practicing Vipassana. And I really felt I felt such a strong calling to visit. I think it was after like my second course or something. I just made this resolution in my head. It's like I'm going to Myanmar. I have to go. I felt a real draw to the country. Given the incredible the connections there with Vipassana, and just the sense of gratitude that I felt towards this country and its people for preserving the technique. And so I decided I was going to go, but I could only get a 3-week visa, I think it was. And I knew that I wanted to sit a 10-day course. So I sat the 10-day course, and then I had maybe 10 days of traveling. So it wasn't very long to actually see the place. But when I arrived, I got a taxi straight to the Vipassana center, which it was lovely. The taxi driver was telling me about the yatra that Goenka had done a few years before, and how he was telling me how he had taken people around, and he spoke very fondly of it. And I thought, wow, gosh, isn't this amazing? Like, I've just got in this taxi, and this man, he knows all about Vipassana. He's knows about Goenka. Like, it was just like, gosh, this is so ingrained in the culture, the Buddhist sort of the Buddhist tradition is that was my first interaction, and I just thought, this is incredible. And it was interesting because obviously all I could see was like out of the taxi, that was kind of my impression of Burma. And then I was kind of in this in the center for 10 days with my eyes shut most of the time. So it was sort of, it was an interesting introduction to the country, because I was sort of hearing it more than I was seeing it, actually, which was quite interesting. It was a very kind of fascinating experience, because I was hearing the birds, and I was, all these sort of exotic birds, and I was hearing, because it was in Yangon, so it's Dharmajoti.
Dharmajoti, yeah, right. That's you hear a lot in Dharmajoti. Dharmajoti is one of the few Goenka centers in the world that's actually in a downtown location, and it's on a street with a lot of monasteries and nunneries, and you hear a lot of Yangon on that street. So I can imagine, if you're not familiar or acquainted with Myanmar culture in any way, and then just landing at that center, you're just going to hear the daily sounds of life, of people selling things and of cars, and then also of monasteries and nunneries and the chantings and the alms rounds and everything else, and not to mention obviously the birds and insects and whatnot, which you'd hear anywhere. So it's quite a stereo compilation that you get there, quite a mixtape.
Absolutely. I remember hearing, like, every afternoon there must have been like a restaurant or something very close to my bedroom, and there were all these men who used to sort of sing in the kitchen, because it sounded like a kitchen. They were kind of like pans clunking, and so it's interesting. I had all these kind of visual visual kind of ideas of what it looked like and what the people looked like. And I mean, of course, there were the people who were meditating, the Burmese people who were meditating. And like you say, one of the things that struck me was like, gosh, a lot of these people don't even have cushions. How are they doing it?
Right.
But I felt such a warmth towards the country, even just in that in the center. There was a sense of real familiarity with the place, and I think when I left the center and I started traveling, and I didn't travel far. I only made it to Inle Lake and Bagan, but I remember thinking I could spend months here, and I wish I had longer. I wish that and so I had this idea that I was going to go back and spend a longer period of time traveling and going to different centers in Myanmar. After the coup, it was like, gosh, it was very, just really harrowing to hear of everything that's been happening.
I felt the same thing on my first visit, and that's why I went back. I was able to find a way, lived there 15 years, and was able to get deeper into those initial things that I saw. And then as one gets deeper, obviously you peer more into beyond the surface impressions and even things at the time that seem deep and go more into the nuances of how the culture works. Not that I'm anywhere near an expert. I think the deeper you go into it, the more you realize what you don't know. But I appreciated what you were saying as well about the taxi drivers. That was something, and I've said this on different interviews before, but that was something that stood out to me so much, was taxi drivers and hotel clerks and waiters and just an assortment of people that when they found out I meditated, it wasn't just, oh, good for you, that's great, which you don't even really get in the West so much, because it can, things are changing now, certainly, but it can also be a bit weird at times. But it would actually be discussions. It'd be like talking to them about the differences between the Mahasi and the Mogok techniques and why one worked better at understanding the mind clearly than the other, or talking about scripture, or talking about certain monk discourses or other things. And it was such a playground of Buddhist practice, and more than a playground in the sense that one was able to learn so many different ways of applying and understanding the Buddhist teachings than just one method or one organization, because there are so many varied pathways of how people made sense of it. But beyond being a playground, it was also like a PhD study or something, where people were so serious and so dedicated about what path they were on. And so to learn from monks as well as lay people, certainly an assortment of lay people who were holding down jobs and businesses at the time, and to hear about how they were, what path they were on, what they were renouncing, or how they were following certain sets of discipline, or what they were through their practice or their behavior or their certain volunteer services they might dedicate themselves towards, how they were following in the path. And it gave me, I think when I started to live there longer, it just gave me such a freedom, and realizing that you really had this ownership and this freedom and flexibility to be able to live in a variety of ways, and to choose how one lived and how one practiced, that would fit under this umbrella, and that can change over time, and you could also experiment. I mean, a lot of kind of playing. I think that was something I didn't quite get before I came, was the playful idea of meditation. It always seemed like a very serious, rigid, exact pursuit of following, adhering to the law, the letter of the law of what those meditation instructions were, which is definitely helpful when you're starting out, when you don't really understand what you're doing, and you're following these instructions by someone who knows more than you do. But as one progresses, there can be a kind of playfulness and a kind of experimentation, and let's see how this is, and let's see how that is, and let's experiment with this. And that was all things I learned there, by seeing how the society and how the different people would bring the teachings into their lives in different ways. And this is a culture that has been at it for much longer than we have, and has much deeper roots than we have over there. And that doesn't mean they do everything right. They're definitely newcomers, beginners can definitely bring a new perspective into things that where it's entrenched, they don't have. And so there's definitely a lot of advantages that we've seen how it's taken off in the West. But that, whatever those advantages are, the flip side of that is these deeply entrenched traditional patterns that have been there for many years, and that people can also work and explore and play within. And so that kind of dynamic quality, I just saw as fascinating. And I think I still think that's really not properly understood. I think that a lot of times Burmese Buddhism, for those who don't understand it, because everything looks the same, the monasteries and the monks and everything else, it looks the opposite of dynamic. It looks static. It looks like everyone's doing the same thing, because the Vinaya, the monastic code, and the monks and nuns dress, of course, that everything looks similar. And so there could be a feeling that everyone is doing the same thing, and they've been doing the same thing for a long time, and this is how things have been hundreds of years ago. And it is true that there's a thorough line of that type of tradition and teachings following forward. But there's also, if you look at Burmese Buddhist history and you look at the landscape of Burmese Buddhism today, and this is leaving aside all of those thorny and uncomfortable issues of the nationalist monks and those supporting the military and against Muslims and such, that's another very important topic. But just leaving that aside for a moment, if you're just looking at the ways of being a practitioner, of being a Buddhist, of following the teachings, there's that kind of surface uniformity is really underlied by quite a degree of experimentation and daringness, and trying new things and incorporating in different ways, and sometimes pushing a bit too far and having a bit of controversy or tension with other traditions or authorities. That's been a part of Burmese Buddhist history for centuries, and it's still true today. And so I think living within that, and this is just all tagging what you said with the waiter or the taxi driver being familiar with Goenka's visit, that this to me is kind of symbolic of a much deeper touch that many people have across many professions, of just being interested in the landscape of Burmese Buddhism as someone in other countries might be interested in sports or politics or business or whatever else one is following in the world. People are just following the developments and the recent history and the general landscape of what Burmese Buddhism is. And I think that's something that we really miss in the West, and that as we understand how it operates in Burma, not that everything's perfect, but it can provide that sense of playfulness and experimentation and trying something and seeing how it goes. So yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I guess that's, we're human, aren't we? And we, just because a society has a Buddhist culture, it's not to say that it's uniform by any means, because we're all different, and we're all seeking, we're seeking the same things but in different ways. So yeah, that's a very interesting observation. And it actually reminded me, when I was in Yangon, I went to a park. I was staying near the Sule Pagoda, and there was
there was a man, I was reading a book, and there was a man there who sort of came up to me and he said, is that an Oscar Wilde book or something? I don't know. He wanted to talk about Oscar Wilde, I think, because he saw I was English. And we got chatting, and he was telling me that he volunteered at an orphanage, and he was showing me all these pictures, and he taught there, and he, helped to feed them. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Just this random man. It just feels like everyone is kind of, I don't know, doing something helpful. I mean, I didn't meet that many people, but it felt like the people I did meet were doing quite incredible things. They were, by sort of English standards, it's like, wow, gosh, you're really sort of going out of your way to help people. And I said, and I would never do this in England, I don't think, or many places, but for some reason, I really, I had a very good sort of intuition about this man. And I said, would you take me to see this orphanage? I'm really interested in actually going to visit. And he said, I think the orphanage was closed or something that day. I can't remember the exact reason, but we weren't able to go. But he said, but I am going to this monastery where I support the monks. I think he sort of helped with. He was sort of volunteering for them. I can't remember exactly what he did, but he sort of organised community events or something. He sort of was the go-between for the monks and the community. So he said, do you want to come to this monastery with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. This random man who I'd only known for sort of half an hour, I was like, yeah. So we, get on a local bus, and, no idea where I'm going, but sort of trusting that I'm going to this monastery. And yeah, sure enough, went to this lovely monastery, and he introduced me to one of the monks, and we sat and had a cup of tea together. And the monk couldn't speak any English, so Mo, the man, was translating. And it was just really, it was like, wow, gosh, look at that. An hour ago I was sitting in a park reading a book, and now I'm having tea with a monk. Who's telling me to become a nun. That was one of the few things he said was, you shave your head and become a nun. So, yeah.
That's great. I want to get to what you were talking about just a bit earlier with you were mentioning that you took this short visit to Myanmar. You desperately wanted to come back and spend extended time as a practitioner digging deeper into the culture and the monastic environment. And then the pandemic happened, and then the coup, and just how devastating that was. So I think there's been a lot of commentary about the coup from those that are looking at it from more academic or journalistic angles, and obviously the people that are caught up in that. But for the foreign practitioners, and for those that Myanmar serves as this place where there are these spiritual opportunities that are open, and that one has come and benefited from them. The coup definitely, from faraway places, it has an impact on just remembering how special the country's been and the interaction with the people. So I'm wondering, for you, as you first got word of the coup and as you followed along to understand what was happening, and having experience with the country directly, and then also being a beneficiary of this practice, not having even been there, but this particular tradition originating there. What were your thoughts and feelings as you were following along, and what was there any sense of how you might like to be engaged, or what you might like to do that was coming as well?
Yeah, it was. I think perhaps like many people, when I first heard about it, I just wasn't. I mean, it was so shocking, but I just had this sense that it wasn't going to, that something would happen, and it wasn't going to be prolonged. At least that's what I hoped. And, it's like when I saw, I mean, your platform has just been so fantastic, Joa, for keeping up to date with what's been going on.
Thank you.
I remember in those early days, you sort of showing how, all the people out on the streets, and it almost felt like the power of the people was going to, that was going to win. That was somehow the strength, and that good volition was going to win. And I think as the weeks and months passed by, and I realised the severity of it through the things you were posting. It's left me with such a heavy heart, and I know that I wasn't in the country for very long when I did go, but I felt such a connection to the country and to the people that it was heartbreaking, and I think I felt a real sense of like I need to do something, but I don't know how. And I think a lot of people felt this sense of there's a helplessness that comes when something is happening in another country. And I was signing petitions, I was donating, I was sending metta, and I just thought, these things are all helping, but what else can I do? And I think in these times of crisis, we have to look at what we're able to contribute, because we all have different skills, and I think that for me, Sati is my business is it's a way for me to bridge this gap between the service that I do at the centre and making a living. And so because I see it as a sort of service, of course I'm earning money from it, but because I see it as a service, my volition is like, how can I help as many people as possible through this mission? And so I thought, well, it makes so much sense for me to run a campaign where some of the profit, some of the money I'm getting from the sales is going towards a good cause. And for me, this Burmese cause is incredibly close to my heart, and because of especially because of the practice and the gratitude that I feel towards the country and the people. But I think it's really been cemented by some friendships that I made when I was in Burma. I met some girls through the Vipassana course that I sat, and they were so kind and lovely, and they took me and some other meditators out for lunch a couple of days after we finished the course, and they paid for everything, and it was just, they were such incredible people. And so I think having that kind of personal connection with people in the country, in this country that's going through such hardship at the moment, it's just reinforced my desire to help. And I've been in contact with them, to sort of check they were, especially in the early days, I kept sending them messages to check they were okay. And, and they would always be very light in their response. They'd say, yeah, we're fine, don't worry about us. But I do wonder whether they were perhaps withholding information because they didn't feel safe to say anything else. I just don't know. Perhaps, they are fine. I think those friendships really, they were sort of, they just helped cement that volition. So, and I think, because the country is just, it's very close to my heart. And and I also actually met, I was serving a few months ago. I was serving with a Burmese girl who lives in England, but is her family are all still in Burma, and she was telling me how she basically cried every day for the first year because of everything that's happening, and I just could see the pain. And she also said that, because I was asking, I was like really interested to actually speak to her, because I said, what are your family telling you? What's, do you speak to them on the phone? How are they? And she said, they can speak on the phone, but they can't talk about anything to do with what's happening, because, they don't know if the line is bugged, or, they just, everyone feels so unsafe that no one can even talk about it. And she was telling me also that her sister is a civil servant in Yangon, and her family all really want her to leave her position, because they don't want her to be working for essentially the military. But her sister is so terrified, because she knows that if she leaves, then she'll have to go on the run, because she won't, her safety would be compromised potentially. So it's a very, I just feel like there's something we can all do, no matter how small, by using our skills and coming together to help.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when the coup first hit, very few people can say that they're prepared to know how to handle a sudden military coup. I say very few people because, unfortunately, in Myanmar, there is an older generation that does have those institutional memories of the battle days, but the young generation did not. They did not really even believe those stories, and suddenly had to find just a backbone of steel that you don't know you have until those situations. And I think that one of the things I also appreciate about what you're saying is that I think it's so important to tell these stories, these very true and authentic stories about Myanmar as a giver and a provider. I think that it's so misunderstood in the way it can be characterized in international media as being a failed place that always is in need of help, that's in need of pity, that needs to receive the good wishes and the help of other people. And I think that that's a very distorted version from one of the most, as you and I know, one of the most generous places in the world, and a country and a people that are such tremendous givers and so gracious, and giving not just material things like taking you out to eat for a lunch, but giving spiritual teachings, offering a spiritual home, offering you to be a nun and to have all your needs taken care of, so you can pursue a spiritual development of letting go of things. And that the giving that we are now doing to Myanmar is not the giving out of pity or of someone advantaged to someone less advantaged. It's part of a reciprocal relationship, especially for those of us who've benefited from spiritual teachings or from visits to the country, that is reciprocating what has already been given for so long, either directly or indirectly. And I think that there is an unsafety there. When you talk about your friends not really knowing how safe they are, there are definitely people that are in more danger based on their location, based on their involvements, but there's also no safety anywhere. There's no, not even in one's own home. I mean, the soldiers are basically now just bands of marauding thieves and rapists and murderers that are just burning and pillaging their way through the country right now through the reports that we're seeing. It hasn't really affected the cities on the same scale, on the same intensity and consistency, although even in the cities, they sometimes get bored or drunk or angry, and they fire weapons in random homes. Countless people, Burmese, have told me about bullets that have ended up in their homes, or things that have broken because bombs or mortars have been nearby. Just unimaginable, unfathomable to have to live through that. And we know that this current military is not very well trained, and they're not very motivated, and so they don't pick fair fights. They don't look to fight to have battles with PDFs or EAOs that usually beat them in pretty convincing victories. They look to go after vulnerable populations. They look to go after villages that are undefended, or IDP camps of people who've already fled, or ethnic areas where they already have tensions. And because one side is by and large being much more humane and being careful about the innocents, and the other isn't, that's a huge disadvantage that they're able to continue pressing. And there's stories of surprise attacks launched on certain bands of soldiers who then turn in the other direction and run to the nearest village to burn that village because they want to take out their vengeance and want to inflict pain on someone for the pain they just received. And so there is the whole country hasn't blown up yet, and hopefully it won't, but there isn't any safety in terms of where one can go, and there's certainly no higher authority to appeal to when it's these authorities that are just these bands of raiders and marauders around the country. So moving to the current promotion that we are launching on the eve of the release of this episode, and is lasting for a couple weeks beyond this date. As you mentioned, there is a portion of that will be going towards the Better Burma nonprofit, which is the greater nonprofit, which our podcast rests under. And this nonprofit was founded several weeks after the coup. We didn't have any background in nonprofits before this, but as we mentioned, everyone just had to do whatever they can. One of the things we could do was set up a legal mechanism for being able to collect donations from well-wishers around the world to go to humanitarian missions in Myanmar. And all of the donations that we receive go strictly towards humanitarian missions. They go strictly towards nonviolent needs, ranging everything from IDPs to clean drinking water to medicine and COVID relief, protecting vulnerable populations who are suddenly under assault and need to quickly move and be safe in some other area, feeding monks and nuns, going to poor areas as well. So a wide range of missions, obviously CDM, civil disobedience movement as well, a wide range of nonviolent humanitarian missions. And so with any purchase of any of the products of Sati Design from now for the next couple of weeks, a portion will go towards this. And I was thinking about this, and I think one of the things that struck me is that as we were talking about meditation cushions being invested, and shawls, as I gave my story, being invested with this kind of significance, this kind of mindfulness, who gave it to you, where it was procured, how it was made, the quality and the aesthetic and the practicality, all of this. And it's something that can accompany through one's life on a spiritual journey. I was thinking how special it is that to think of having a meditation cushion, as we've talked about, that would be for life, but knowing that the purchase of this cushion was going towards the place which one can say made the meditation possible, that the meditation originated in a place which is, or at least this particular tradition, the Goenka tradition, Goenka and his line of teachers growing up in Burma. Obviously, the Buddha came from India many centuries ago, but this particular practice coming from Burma, and now Burma being under so much stress and tension that this meditation cushion, as one continues to use, knowing that part of the proceeds of acquiring this went back to that place where the meditation was made possible. So it's this kind of beautiful loop that is connecting many different pieces, which is quite lovely when you think about that intentionality And closing, just a thought, I agree with what you said. Everyone has something they can do. And whether it's sending metta, giving donations, giving some kind of volunteer practical support, checking in on friends, some of these things don't cost any money. Simply to send an email to friends letting them know that you care does a tremendous amount. We've benefited, our nonprofit, I should say, has benefited from similar individuals who've just taken it upon themselves. A German woman in Berlin who just decided to do bake sales for a month with donating all the proceeds to Better Burma, just cooking and selling muffins and cookies and such. And had another recording artist who did a kind of musical compilation, and all the proceeds, again, that went to Better Burma. So these kind of creative ways that one could step up and can contribute either through fundraising, through little acts of fundraising that then go into the pot and help the people, or even things that are more advocacy and awareness. We did an interview with a graffiti artist in Montreal who just decided to paint a mural on one of the streets in Montreal reflecting the experiences in Myanmar and what they're going through, just to try to bring that out. There was a very famous mural that just went up in, I think it was Belgium, it was somewhere in Western Europe. I think Cup of Tea is the Instagram account, or Switzerland. I think it was Switzerland where it went up. Also depicting it. There was a guy I saw online that was, I think in Tennessee or somewhere in the US, that was simply playing bagpipes. And he was just playing bagpipes, trying to raise awareness about the attention. And then, of course, an account that many people follow that's quite inspiring is this guy who in Atlanta, who just decided to run 5K every day for Burma, and has done that since the coup, and has gotten people around the world to do that. So whether it's small things that are encouraging advocacy, or whether they're small actions that are bringing fundraising, these are the power of the individual. And all this momentum counts. In the past, when these things have happened in Myanmar, and the military knows this very well, there's condemnation at first, and shock and horror from the big organizations and the leaders of countries and people reading the news. But then life goes back to normal, and people forget, they get distracted by other things, and the military is able to really, when they know they're in the shadows, to really do what it takes to retain their control and oppression. But these acts are so important because they're trying to turn this tide. And just as Generation Z in Burma today has done things that no other resistance group has ever done in past moments of trying to unroot this evil around the world, there's also a role, and however small the action is, to be able to not just quietly go away and lose attention and lose focus, but in these small ways, they add up to something larger, which is sustained attention, sustained motivation, sustained resistance to the military, and solidarity with the people. And that's what this platform is trying to do. And that's what your initiative is also doing. So really thank you for that.
Well, thank you as well, Joa. What you're doing is just absolutely incredible. Just making people aware of what's happening, and not giving up as well. Continuing to inform people. I think it's so important.
Well, just following the lead of our brothers and sisters in Myanmar, just trying to follow in their sacrifices and their hope, and just hope they know that we're not alone, that there's allies who do care, and that from our freedom and safety, we're using that to be able to work and speak on their behalf. Yes, absolutely. So with that, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk about your spiritual journey and your product. And thanks for this special promotion period, which is starting today.
Thank you so much, Joa. Thank you.
We want to present a special opportunity for donors who are committed to our show. While we want to stress that we greatly appreciate donations of any size, larger donations, of course, are particularly helpful. For that reason, we're encouraging donors with means to consider sponsoring a full episode for a one-time donation of $350 or more. Donations in this category can include a dedication, if you like, to a person or organization, as well as a quotation or expression. Or your generous donation can be anonymous. The choice is yours. In either case, it would give you the satisfaction of knowing that you enabled at least one more episode to be produced for the benefit of the people in Myanmar who have suffered so much at the hands of the military. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go to support a wide range of humanitarian missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person, IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and much more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution for a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian aid work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org. That's BETTERBURMA.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either the Insight Myanmar or Better Burma websites for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give it another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.